freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com, on the #1 listener-supported radio on the net, or talk radio on the net, let's be precise. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for about $5 a month via Patreon. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say hello to all of the people who are new to Shiny Side Out and new to Revolution Radio, and maybe we're just totally happy that you're listening to us and you've invited us into your lives. We're glad you're on board, and because Mecky and I have a show called Shiny Side Out, we are determined to advise you of a few warnings. 1, keep your arms within the vehicle, turn off your personal reality inverters, and please, no flash photography. We're halfway through, I suppose it's week 481. This is the second half of the show for that week, and we are talking about the parasitic class, making part 3.
Parasites, yes, because look, for the longest time we've been referring to, let's call them the hidden ones, if you want, as our elite. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to call them the elite, because I think they're parasites. Okay, that's why this change in tact, if you will, to some extent anyway. It's really where we are, and yes, we are talking about that, and we are on.
That's what I was going to ask next.
Yeah, we are on page. I'll tell you where we are. It's before that.
Remember the aside. It's loss of backing. Is that right?
History of fractional reserve banking. That's
yes,
my friend. That's page number.
I got it.
13.
12 on my account.
Oh yeah, that could be because I might have changed the font to make it easier for me to read. So everybody, we are talking. So we, just a quick recap. We have talked about money. We've talked about fiat currency, what that means. We've talked about fractional reserve lending in general, and fractional reserve lending simply means that a bank can lend money on the premise that it has some reserves, right? So if you've got $1, then you can lend $1. That's what you would think. Not so. If you have $1, you can lend out $100. And in Australia, in fact, there's no limit. You can lend as much money as you want based on that $1. But usually it's about 10 or 15% that you have to hold. So if you lend out $1,000, you have to have at least $100 in the bank, which of course means that if everybody wanted their money physically, that is, to withdraw, then that wouldn't be possible. And that's when you get a bank run and the whole system collapses.
And when Mickey says wants their money, wants it in a physical form.
Correct. Like, notes and coins.
Because you can transfer it somewhere else.
Correct. And we also need to understand that our currency, the fiat currency, is no longer a commodity currency, meaning you can't walk into a bank and demand gold in exchange for your dollar bills or silver or whatever, right? You can't. You used to be, but that hasn't happened for a long time now. So let's talk about the history of the fractional reserve lending, because in my opinion, and I've said it before and I'll say it anytime anybody will ask me about it, and this is one of the things I'm really passionate about, is the biggest fraud perpetrated on the human race. It's the biggest crime against humanity that has ever been undertaken by anyone. Fractional reserve lending. Now, the history of fractional reserve lending goes back somewhat. It predates the existence of governmental monetary authorities and originated many centuries ago in bankers' realization that generally not all depositors demand payment at the same time. Okay, so what used to happen is, in the past, savers or people that had wealth or gold and silver, etc., were looking to keep their coins and valuables safe. But how would you do that, right? And what they did is they deposited gold and silver at the goldsmith's workshop, if you will, receiving in exchange a note for the deposit. And the reason they did it is because the goldsmiths of the time usually had fairly strong vaults or strong rooms or safes where they would keep their valuables, because obviously being a goldsmith, you have gold and silver and other, maybe jewels, etc., and you would be an easy target for robbers. So what you do is you keep them in a safe place. Makes sense, right? And because you have that safe place, other people would bring you their valuables to keep them safe, and they would give you a receipt. So here are 10 bars of gold, Mr. Goldsmith, and Goldsmith goes, okay, great, here's a receipt. Thank you very much. You've given me 10 gold bars. You present it back to me, and I give back the gold bars to you. That's it's simply like a safety deposit box. That's the arrangement. Except, of course, these goldsmiths realized that, hey, hang on, I'm sitting on a whole bunch of value here, and nobody has come back to it. Maybe in months or years. Why is it just sitting there fallow, right? So these notes that the goldsmith issued to the people that put it in deposit, they gained acceptance as a medium of exchange for commercial transactions, and thus became an early form of circulating paper money. I mean, if you deposited, I'm just making this up now, if you deposit 10 gold bars, 1 kilo each, just 10 kilos of gold, that's a lot to lug around. It's much easier to have a promissory note with you, like that a receipt that says, hey, I do have 10 bars of gold sitting with John Goldsmith over there. Here's the paper that proves it. And you could get a note, a receipt for each of the gold bars, or maybe you get a note, 10 notes for each gold bar. So you could start using it as currency, because it's again a lot easier to carry on than the actual metal or the valuable item itself. It's also a lot safer in many ways, because the goldsmith would know you, right? And if somebody stole these notes, then chances were that the goldsmith might not hand the valuables over if the note was presented full well knowing that the actual owner was robbed of it, right? So it was actually a system that worked. As the notes were used directly in trade, the goldsmiths observed that people would not usually redeem all their notes at the same time, right? Which means they would hold on to the notes, right? And would not come to claim their valuables. And they saw the opportunity, that's the goldsmiths, to invest their coin reserves in interest-bearing loans and bills. Right? This generated income for the goldsmiths, but left them with more notes on issue than reserves with which to pay them. So they would lend, or they would give people notes based on the gold they were holding, but more than they actually had. Right? That was the basis for fractional reserve lending. That's how it started. A process was started that altered the role of the goldsmiths from passive guardians of bullion or wealth, right, like physical silver, gold, etc., charging fees for safe storage, to interest-paying and interest-earning banks. And that's, like I said earlier, how fractional reserve lending was born. It was the realization that once people had put their gold, silver, etc., into the bank, into a safe deposit box, or into a vault with the goldsmith, it would sit there for a while. It would just sit there. However, if creditors, now these are the note holders of the gold originally deposited, right? So these are the people that put the gold originally with the goldsmith. If these creditors lost faith in the ability of a bank to pay their notes, many would try to redeem their notes at the same time. If, in response, a bank could not raise enough funds by calling in loans or selling bills, it either went into insolvency or defaulted on its loans. Such a situation is called a bank run and caused the demise of many early banks. So the banks essentially falls, right? That's what happened. But now there are laws against that. There can't be any more bank runs, believe it or not. Starting in the late 1600s, nations began to establish central banks, which were given the legal power to set the reserve requirement and to specify the form in which such assets, called monetary base, are required to be held. So they set the percentage of what you have to hold in reserve in order to lend out certain monies. Okay? The reciprocal of the reserve requirement, called the money multiplier, limits the size to which the money supply may grow for a given level of reserves in the banking system. So let's say you've got a gold coin. You can't lend out 1 million gold coins against it. I mean, not gold coins, but the paper equivalent. Right? I guess you can these days, but it was seen as not a sensible thing to do. In order to mitigate the impact of bank failures and financial crises, central banks were also granted the authority to centralize banks' storage of precious metal reserves, thereby facilitating transfer of gold in the event of bank runs to regulate commercial banks, impose reserve requirements, and to act as lender of last resort in any bank if any bank faced a bank run. So the central banks, which were usually unique to each nation, each country, would be the last insurer, if you will, or assurer of payment of your deposit. So you put your money in good faith into a bank. The bank fails. Well, no, hang on a second, it doesn't, because the central bank will make sure it doesn't, and we can still pay you. The emergence of central banks reduced the risk of bank runs, which is inherent in fractional reserve banking, and it allowed the practice to continue as it does today. During the 20th century, the role of the central bank grew to include influencing or managing various macroeconomic policy variables, including measures of inflation, unemployment, and the international balance of payments. In the course of enacting such policy, central banks have from time to time attempted to manage interest rates, reserve requirements, and various measures of the money supply and the monetary base. How it works. This is interesting, and you need to know this. Very important. Okay, everybody listen up very carefully. In most legal systems in the world, a bank deposit is not a bailment. In other words, the funds deposited are no longer the property of the customer. What? You say? The funds become the property of the bank, and the customer in turn receives an asset called a deposit account or a checking account or a savings account or whatever. Okay? Do you understand that? The money you put into the bank is no longer yours. You now have an account that you've received in return for your funds. That deposit account is a liability of the bank on the bank's books and on its balance sheet, because the bank is authorized by law to create credit up to an amount equal to a multiple of the amount of its reserves. The bank's reserves on hand to satisfy payment of deposit liabilities amount to only a fraction of the total amount which the bank is obligated to pay in satisfaction of its demand deposits. Okay? Are we clear so far?
I'm
right
okay.
Now, you're the hairs on the back of your neck should be standing up. You should be, whatever cup you're holding should be crumpling in your hands. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now we saw this in Greece, in the Greek system, where the government says, you know what, we're gonna take all your money in the banks, and they could, because it was not the money of the people that deposited it. I'm gonna say it again. In most legal systems, a bank deposit is not a bailment. In other words, the funds deposited are no longer the property of the customer. The funds become the property of the bank, and the customer, in turn, receives an asset called a deposit account, or checking or savings account, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay? You should be angry, but you don't know this. You didn't know this, and you might have been better off not knowing it, but I believe information is power. Now, fractional reserve banking ordinarily functions very smoothly. Okay, it does, because we don't know any better. We don't know any better. Relatively few depositors demand payment at any given time, and banks maintain a buffer of reserves to cover depositors' cash withdrawals and other demands for funds. Of course they do. I mean, they're not stupid, right? However, this is where it gets interesting. During a bank run or a generalized financial crisis, demands for withdrawal can exceed the bank's funding buffer, and the bank will be forced to raise additional reserves to avoid defaulting on its obligation. A bank can raise funds from additional borrowings, for example, borrowing in the interbank lending market or from the central bank, by selling assets or by calling in short-term loans, right? I mean, foreclosures, etc. If creditors are afraid that the bank is running out of reserves or is insolvent, they have an incentive to redeem their deposits as soon as possible before other depositors access the remaining reserves. Thus, the fear of a bank run can actually precipitate the crisis. Many of the practices of contemporary bank regulation and central banking, including centralized clearing of payments, central bank lending to member banks, regulatory auditing, and government-administered deposit insurance are designed to prevent the occurrence of such bank runs. Dave, economic functions, what are they doing?
Yeah, fractional reserve banking allows banks to create credit in the form of bank deposits, which represent immediate liquidity to depositors. The banks also provide longer-term loans to borrowers and act as financial intermediaries for those funds. Less liquid forms of deposits, such as time deposits or riskier classes of financial assets, such as equities and long-term bonds, may lock up depositors' wealth for a period of time, making it unavailable for use on demand. Like, you might be restricted by the term. You put something into a 10-year term, you can't withdraw it until the 10 years is up. So that reduces your ability to get at it. Therefore, they don't need to be able to have that as a reserve. The borrowing short or lending long or maturity transformation function of fractional reserve banking is a role that many economists consider to be an important function of the commercial banking system. Additionally, according to macroeconomics theory, a well-regulated fractional reserve bank system also benefits the economy by providing regulators with powerful tools for influencing the money supply and interest rates. Many economists believe that these should be adjusted by the government to promote macroeconomic stability. Well, in Australia, we don't allow the government to actually touch the interest rates. The central bank does that.
Correct.
Modern central banking allows banks to practice fractional reserve banking with interbank business transactions with a reduced risk of bankruptcy. The process of fractional reserve banking expands the money supply of the economy, but also increases the risk that a bank cannot meet its depositor withdrawals.
I want you to think about the word bankrupt for a second. Literally a ruptured bank, which implies, it is a beautiful visual image, a bank that is cracked open and is just spewing out money. It's ruptured, it's sinking. Hemorrhaging, thank you, excellent word. Hemorrhaging money. That's what bankruptcy actually is. Okay, it is the inability of a bank to pay its depositors. That's it. That's the. And I mean, of course, now it's anybody can be bankrupt these days, but the very term is only applicable in its original variation, if you will, to banks. Enron, yes, Enron. Enron was a whole special case. Maybe we should do a show on Enron.
Too big to fail, Mickey.
What happened there was just astounding. If once you get into it and you understand what happened in Enron, you just shake your head and you go, "Wow, really?" So this is a fractional reserve link. So the money creation process is really fascinating. Okay, now bear in mind that the fiat currencies with which we transact today have actually no real value. They don't. Okay, there's nothing like that anymore. Like, there's nothing backing them. So just bear that in mind as I share this with you. There are two types of money in a fractional reserve banking system operating with a central bank. Two types. One, central bank money. Money created or adopted by the central bank regardless of its form. Precious metals, commodity certificates, banknotes, coins, electronic money loaned to commercial banks, or anything else the central bank chooses as its form of money. In fact, the first few I mentioned there, such as precious metals, commodity, etc., gone out the window. Second, commercial bank money. These are demand deposits in the commercial banking system, sometimes referred to as checkbook money. Okay? When a deposit of central bank money is made at a commercial bank, the central bank money is removed from circulation and added to the commercial bank's reserve. It is no longer counted as part of M1 money supply. Simultaneously, an equal amount of new commercial bank money is created in the form of bank deposits. When a loan is made by the commercial bank, which keeps only a fraction of the central bank money as reserves, remember? Using the central bank money from the commercial bank's reserve, the M1 money supply expands by the size of the loan. Okay? Because it doesn't exist. Let me say this again. The M1 money supply, which is the actual money supply in the economy, expands by the size of the loan because it's created from nothing.
It's like a balloon.
Yeah. So think of a barren desert. Nothing happens, and all of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. There are these mushrooms. This is what happens here. It is created out of nothing. This process is called, of course, there's a name for it, deposit multiplication. also known as I know what's going on and you idiots don't. Thank you very much. But that's the more technical term they use behind closed doors. So again, you need to understand that the money supply expands by the size of the loan. It's coming from nowhere. It doesn't exist. This example shows how central bank money is used to create commercial bank money from an initial deposit of $100 of central bank money. So this is the example. The initial deposit of $100 is lent out 10 times with a fractional reserve rate of 20% to ultimately create $500 of commercial bank money. So the central bank money is real money. Let's think about it this way. There's central bank money, and this was created by the central bank for the economy. Here you go, it's actual money. Now, that $100 was given to the commercial banks, right? And that it's lent out 10 times. And again, the fractional reserve rate is 20%. So that means we have now created $500 of commercial bank money. It's important to note that the 20% reserve rate used here is for ease of illustration. Actual reserve requirements are usually a lot lower. For example, it's around 3% in the US and UK. And I've got a table here later, which we'll share with you, which has the actual percentages that have to be held by each country. But we'll get to that in a second. Okay? Each successive bank involved in this process creates new commercial bank money on a diminishing portion of the original deposit of central bank money. This is because banks only lend out a portion of the central bank money deposited in order to fulfill reserve requirements and to ensure that they always have enough reserves on hand to meet normal transaction demands. And there are people sitting in offices trying to figure out what that is. Trust me, that's someone's job. The re-lending model begins with when an initial $100 deposit of central bank money is made into Bank A. Okay, so $100 from the central bank go to Bank A. Bank A takes 20% of it, or $20, and sets it aside as a reserve. There it goes. And then can theoretically loan out the remaining 80% or $80. If the bank does in fact issue loan proceeds in the form of $80 in central bank money, the money supply actually totals $180, not 100, because the bank has loaned out 80 of the central bank money, kept 20 of the central bank money in reserve, not part of the money supply, by the way, and substituted a newly created $100 IOU claim for the depositor that acts equivalent to and can be implicitly redeemed for central bank money, which means the depositor can transfer it to another account, write a check on it, demand his cashback, blah, 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 blah. These claims by depositors on banks are termed demand deposits or commercial bank money and are simply recorded in a bank's accounts as a liability. Think of it as an IOU to the depositor, okay? From a depositor's perspective, commercial bank money is equivalent to central bank money. It is impossible to tell the two forms of money apart unless a bank run occurs. At this point in the re-lending model, Bank A now only has $20 of central bank money on its books. The loan recipient is holding $80 in central bank money, but he soon spends the $80. The receiver of that $80 then deposits into Bank B. Bank B is now in the same situation as Bank A started with, except it has a deposit of $80 of central bank money instead of $100. Similar to Bank A, Bank B sets aside 20% of that $80 or $16 as reserves and lends out the remaining $64, increasing the money supply overall by $64. As the process continues, more commercial bank money is created out of thin air, and that's only lending out money that they have. We're not talking about money multipliers per se yet. So this is just money that goes from Bank A to Bank B, and they don't lend out multiples of the $100. Okay, so this is really where it gets crazy, Dave. Why don't you tell us about the fractional reserve holding requirements?
Okay, the reserve requirement, or cash reserve ratio, is a central bank regulation that sets the minimum amount of reserves that must be held by a commercial bank. The minimum reserve is generally determined by the central bank to be no less than a specified percentage of the amount of deposit liabilities the commercial bank owes to its customers. The commercial bank's reserves normally consist of cash owned by the bank and stored physically in the bank vault, or vault cash, plus the amount of the commercial bank's balance in that bank's account with the central bank. So it can be either in the bank's own cash or the vault, or it can be held with the central bank. Making the circular notion here, reminder, or the notion of the counting was, and the number of the counting shall be 3. No more, no less.
Not 7, that's right out.
Yeah, exactly. The holy hand grenade of Antioch. So that's how this is written. It's very funny. What about the US?
In the United States, a reserve requirement or liquidity ratio. See, it's interesting. All this technical jargon comes into it to confuse you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Just cut through the chase and understand the basics. I'm hoping we're doing this here. A reserve requirement is a minimum value set by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, which is, by the way, not a federal system at all, but privately owned, of the ratio of required reserves to a category of deposit liabilities. That's called the net transaction accounts, okay? Owed by depository institutions to their customers, okay? Owed by commercial banks, including US branches of a foreign bank, savings and loan associations, savings banks, credit unions, etc., etc. The deposit liability category is currently subject to reserve requirements on mainly checking accounts. There are no reserve requirements on savings accounts and time deposit accounts owned by individuals. The total amount of all NTAs, which is the net transaction accounts, held by customers with US depository institutions, plus the US paper currency and coin currency held by the non-bank public, is called the M1 money supply. As of March 2020, the minimum reserve requirement for all deposit institutions was abolished. Let's say this again. As of March 2020, in the United States this is, the minimum reserve requirement for all deposit institutions was abolished, or more technically, fixed to 0% of eligible deposits. We can't call it nothing, or we can't say it's gone away. It's just 0% now.
0%. Yeah, we know that. Everyone knows that.
It's a percent, but it's 0. The board previously mandated a zero reserve requirement for banks with legible deposits up to 16 million, 3% for banks up to 122.3 million, and 10% thereafter. The removal of reserve requirements followed the Federal Reserve's shift to an ample reserves system, in which the Federal Reserve banks pay member banks interest on reserves that they keep in excess of the required amount. So let me break that down for you. What they're doing is they've removed the minimum holding by incentivizing banks to hold reserves. So the central bank, or the Federal Reserve Bank, pays member banks interest on reserves they're holding in order to have reserves in the first place, right? But no one is obligated to hold these reserves. There's just like a carrot. Yeah, it's a carrot. There's no stick. There's no stick. You don't hold it, well, so be it. All
yeah,
right?
but Mickey, it's so easy to conform with the 0% holdings.
No. It's crazy.
Oh, I'm doing everything that's regulated.
Yeah, no, but that you are.
Oh yeah.
No one can fault you. You're A-okay, Mr. Bankman.
How much money do you want?
The International Banking Act of 1978 required branches of foreign banks operating in the United States to follow the same required reserve ratio standards. Okay, so foreign banks.
Oh, zero. Oh, hang on. I'm a foreign bank, Becky, and you're the United States, right? So hang on. I want to open up. I understand there's regulations. It could be complicated. Look, we've set aside a whole bunch of revenue for this fractional reserve lending thing you've got going on in your country. So how much do I need to store?
Nothing.
Nothing. Is that a percent?
Zero. So I'm sorry. You only need 0%.
Oh, zero. Oh well, we can certainly comply with that regulation.
In fact, let me be more specific. What you need is 0.00%.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. We shall open up the bank forthwith.
Yes. Oh yes. Absolutely. Now, there was something really interesting raised in the chat, and I want to bring this to everybody's attention. This is coming from nobody. No, that's the.
Nobody is somebody, you know.
That's the avatar. Yeah, nobody, somebody. Nemo, Captain Nemo, which means Captain Nobody, in case you didn't know. Now, the question is, how does barter? Because the question was, do I recommend?
Does it really?
Digital yuan? No, I do not recommend the digital yuan. What I recommend is a barter society, which does not allow parasites to exist, or at least makes it harder for them to exist. Right? So the society we have today is broken. We're living in a broken society, which unfairly and unreasonably and unconscionably, to the detriment of the vast majority of the human race, favors and advantages the very, very few. So the question is, how does barter work with emergency situations and the doctor doesn't want eggs or his computer upgraded? What happens with seasonal work or when a farmer has 2 years of floods and fires? Right? Barter sounds risky and would dissuade specialists. I don't disagree that there are drawbacks. But
no, we did cover barter at the top of this show arc.
We did. Our society, fundamentally, the way it exists today, is a broken society. It can no longer sustain itself, and it will eventually completely collapse. It will. It's terrible to say. Now we've got two ways to go here. We can adopt a Star Trek-like society, where we live in a meritocracy, and people are rewarded in a way that reflects their achievements.
And it benefits society. It's a merit-based.
It could be anything, artists, and
that's right.
Cooks or whoever. It doesn't really matter. But we no longer elevate certain things over others, right? Just because we're moving to barter, we're not moving nobody to a subsistence life cycle. That's not at all the case here. Let me be very clear. Before we settled in cities, our nomadic ancestors lived to ripe old age of 80, 90 years. They were in much better health than we are today. They lived more productive and healthy lives, and arguably happier. I mean, I can't say that they did live happier lives, but the skeletal evidence and paleontological, archaeological evidence suggests they lived longer and healthier lives. And then something happened, and the answer to what happened, the answer to the question of what happened was cities. That was the answer to whatever question was asked. And the question that the cities raised then was agriculture and domestication and a whole bunch of
blame the Sumerians.
And now we are where we are because of what happened when we started.
I blame the Anunnaki.
Well, I do too. Because they needed a workforce in a place. The human. No. Star Trek Society is not the China Social Credit Society. This is not. The China Social Credit Society is based upon the vote of the majority. Okay, the way Star Trek works is it's a completely impartial system. There's no one is voting on anything. Okay, everybody's given the opportunity to succeed in their own way, in their own right. But this can only exist in a post-scarcity society, and we are moving into a post-scarcity society. Now, what does that mean? In a post-scarcity society, resources exist in abundance, and believe it or not, and I know people will tell me, "Oh, Mackie, that's nonsense." We are now in a society that could provide everything to everybody on the planet. Could we all live like the top 10% in the United States? No, we could not. Could we live a lot better than people that are starving to death today? Yes, we could.
Completely.
We could all live very good lives, but the machine that we're in will not allow us to do that, because if we move the cogs out of the machine, it'll break. And once it breaks, you can't put it back together again. Humpty Dumpty off the wall, that's it. Okay? It just won't happen. And the people that could affect the change, that could lead our society into a post-scarcity kind of civilization, which we could be in now, are not incentivized to do so. Why would I do that? There's one thing the parasites will do, and that's to self-sustain. The system we have today has got one key focus point, and that's self-perpetuation. We're living in a world that is self-perpetuating, okay? We cannot break it unless we really break it, okay? Is it going to be easy? No, it's not going to be easy. But I can tell you, if we don't do it, if it's not done, if we don't change the way we live fundamentally, and I'm not talking about this whole reset thing at all. That's not what I'm talking about. This is not what this is. No, it's not a Brave New World either. It's not that. It is, as human beings, and I maintain that we're children, we need to grow up. We need to remove the parasites. There is no longer any ethical or moral grounds for the existence of billionaires. We cannot let corporations dictate that millions and millions of people are starving to death. It's happening. Here in the West, we're living in a relative dreamland. Okay, first world problems. Yeah, absolutely. We are not in equilibrium with ourselves. We're not in equilibrium with the world. We are living the nightmare. We are in the nightmare. The vast majority of us are living in nightmare every day. Millions of children are starving to death every year. You know, there's a virus called the hunger. You know what cures it? Food. Do we have enough food? Yes, we do. There's this lie that's perpetuated that we do not. I don't know if you remember this. There was something called the peak oil myth. All right, I went to a lot of conferences.
Oh, peak oil. Yes, I saw that in the 70s and then repeated again a number of times.
In fact, peak oil was meant to be reached in the year 2000 or thereabouts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. People say today, there's not enough food to go around. We are destroying hundreds of millions of tons of food every year. Nobody. The parasites are not the MBA middle managers. The parasites are everybody in the banking system, the higher ups, lawyers, Wall Street people, politicians,
stockbrokers, or people playing stock. Yeah.
Now these are the parasites that we can see, but there are a few parasites that we cannot see, which are the ones that are keeping the system going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you need to open your eyes a bit further. You need to look at.
They're good questions, though, Mackie. This interaction with the chat room is pretty good.
I love the interaction with the chat room. I love what is being brought forward by both Nobody and the Desert Queen. Thank you so much for your engagement.
So just remembering, that the meritocracy in Star Trek isn't communism.
No.
And if you're a Star Trek person, you'll see, if you're a fan of that universe, then you'll see that everyone is supported in a way that because obviously the food is via replicator. There's replicator rations. You get an allowance of an amount of things that you can replicate, so your choice, right? And your effort, like a military effort, Mackie, advancing everything, taking part, being part of it, rather than like a fringe dweller who does nothing. So I think given the opportunity to eat and do something in your society, I think it is good. It doesn't mean that everyone's has to queue for a year to get a bicycle.
Yeah, but it's also not utopia. So
it isn't utopia, no.
There's no such thing, I believe, at least at this stage of our evolution. There's no such thing as a perfect utopian society where everybody's happy, kumbaya. No, I don't think so. However, what I do believe that this society, this civilization, forget society, this civilization we've created for ourselves, this global civilization that we have inhabit right now, unfairly, and in fact, incredibly unfairly, favors the few and condemns the many. It condemns the many to a life of existence. Not a life of living, but a life of existence. And in some cases, not even that. Not even enough to exist. Not even enough to exist. Now, if I don't know if you have family or children, everybody in the chat room, imagine you had to walk 20 kilometers to get clean water, and then you got there's no clean water. So there's no water for you for that day, or no food, or no medicine. Okay? We're living in a world today, and I'm happy to debate this with anyone that is out there in the world, that could provide for everybody. No, not to the level of lifestyle that some nations enjoy. In fact, we can't all be billionaires either, no. But if you do the simple math here for a second, right? Look at the number of billionaires and how much wealth they hold. These numbers are touted, a lot of time. In America, for example, the top 1% hold 80% of the wealth of the nation. That's what they say, roughly thereabouts, right? And the bottom 60% or 50% or whatever the number is hold 10%. Those percentages aren't exactly it, but they're about right, those ratios. That should say a lot. I mean, we are kept, if we're lucky, we're kept in wage slavery, which means we work from paycheck to paycheck. If you work in a good job, like an MBA middle manager, you might even have enough to put away and think about a future for your children and retirement, etc., right? Then you're in a good position, but you're not a parasite. you're still working for a living, right? You still have to contribute, do something. Whereas the parasites, they don't actually contribute anything. I've just explained to you how the money is created out of thin air. Nobody actually put any effort into it. It's just there. Just pops the money, right? And all of a sudden, we're expected to accept it, and we have been accepting it for decades now, for a couple of 100 years, in fact. If you told our ancestors what we're doing, people that lived 200-300 years ago, they would look at us and they go, "Are you insane? How you can't create something out of nothing?" But that's what we do every single day. I hope this is sinking in.
No,
first of all,
we've got teams of scientists trying to do that right now, and they've come up with nothing. But you say you do that in the future, but only with money.
Yeah. Now we have a currency, or most of us, that is worth nothing except the trust we put into it. That's to one side, and then we've got the fractional reserve lending, which allows the parasites to create wealth out of nothing. It's the ultimate con. Please fully understand what's happening here. People are still working, and there's real effort in the world, and people are, they're pushing society forward, right? But look at who we idolize, right? And I'm not taking anything away from anyone, but just look at how we have shifted as a civilization. We idolize actors and in fact, not even that anymore. I'm talking about entertainers, singers, etc. We've even shifted, exactly. We've shifted away from that. We've shifted away to the celebrity that's famous for being famous. We call them influencers, people that unwrap Lego boxes on YouTube, or it's all they're doing is they're posting things which some people like, some people don't like, but arguably they don't add any value to civilization, right? We have no time at all for scientists. Most of us don't even know anymore who these leading lights in science, engineering are, and
they're mostly anonymous.
We don't even want to know. So we're looking at sports. So sports is one thing. Oh yeah, hurrah sports! And we look at the influencers. Yeah, hurrah influencers! And we look at the celebrities. Yeah, hurrah celebrities! And none of these people really do anything to further our civilization, one iota. Okay?
Do you know what they do, Mackie, in this current structure? Is keep us here and stop us questioning things.
Bingo.
They keep us entertained.
Bingo. And we're going to get to the other levers that is being there's education is one lever, and entertainment, or I like to call the red herring, is another. So these are other short cycles we're going to share with you. But the commercial monetary system is one of the strongest levers that we have today.
Mackie, I wanted to mention the thing I typed into our chat. There's so many assumptions in our lives, and one of those is as simple as this. Nowhere, because Mackie mentioned the words Humpty Dumpty, and this came to my mind, right? Nowhere does the Humpty Dumpty story describe Humpty Dumpty as an egg. Think about it. There's a picture of an egg sitting on the wall, but it's not described in the story. Take the picture away, and that Humpty Dumpty could be anything. In fact, it could indeed be this whole construct. Right?
People believe, in fact, it was a war machine. They believe it was a war machine, and once it was broken, all the king's men, all the king's horse couldn't put it back together again. But it could be this construct. Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. So what it does to describe to me when I hear the story, and I've heard it all my life, right, the Humpty Dumpty story, it describes a ruler surrounded by useless yes men or sycophants that can't help him when his world collapses. So that's our world. Who can start this back up again? Or who would want to start it back up?
But see, this is the problem, Dave, right? So we are moving ever closer to the abyss. And there's no way out of where we are. We have created this notion of never ending or never diminishing returns. So what I mean by that is every company on the planet is focused on growth. It's not fixated on growth. You have to grow. More profit, you have to make more, generate more revenue, right? More profit, more revenue. With ever dwindling resources, because we're living on a finite planet. But look, if we invented space travel, then it's a different thing, right? But we are living in a world with finite resources, and we can't strive to ever greater profits and ever greater revenue. We can't. It's just simply not possible. But we are, and the debt levels of each nation are now at a level, even personal debt, it'll never be paid back, ever. It cannot be paid back. So the only way out of this scenario And we've seen it in the past. I'm not making this up, and I'm just saying this is not some kind of
what magic mirror allows us to look through to see what happened in the past that tells the same story?
Well, you just have to read the history books. It's just simple enough, right?
No, I wanted you to give me an example.
Oh, look at World War I and II. Okay, so World War I came about because of the rivalry between Great Britain, Germany, etc., etc. But what happened after that is Germany was destroyed economically, right? It completely collapsed. There's nothing happening, and the only way it could get out of the quagmire that the world found itself in the 1920s, we had the Great Dust Bowl in the United States. I don't know if you remember that, which was the Great Depression, which was a global Great Depression, right? The stock market collapsed, millions and tens of millions of unemployed. It's similar to where we are today. In fact, you wait for climate change to really kick in, right? Forget the Great Dust Bowl. Okay, so we are in a situation where well, again, climate change is arguably human or not human. I don't know. I don't really care at this point. It's happening.
There's a lot of vectors.
Yeah, a lot of vectors, exactly. But the point here is that it is something that's happening, and it will affect us more and more as we move on. This society we've created will collapse. It's not a matter of if, but when. This society, I want to say it again, that we're inhabiting right now, even though it doesn't seem that way, and it never does seem that way. but all of a sudden, when change happens, and I know this because my grandparents told me, they lived through World War I, they lived through World War II, right, in Europe, so they know this kind of stuff. They told me it just happens overnight. The collapse is just all of one day everything is fine, the next day it is not.
It's like revolution, Mickey. Completely.
And there's a beautiful quote I heard recently. Every revolution seems impossible until it becomes inevitable.
That's right.
So it is the same with this. Every collapse, every society, every empire, in fact, and this is what probably Dave was driving at, went through a cycle in its existence. And take the British Empire. British Empire started by defeating the Spanish. Well, the storm defeated the Spanish, but be that as it may, the British Empire rose as a direct result of the decline of the Spanish Empire. Okay, the fleet was destroyed, and it rose and went through. Its Sturm und Drang, so it grew and it became more powerful, and it was arguably the most powerful empire of its time. No argument. And then it went into decline. And now, who cares? Now the Commonwealth, there's the Queen still there. Sure, she's the biggest landowner, but the British Empire is gone for all intents and purposes, right? There's some remnants. The Roman Empire, 2,000 years ago, it grew out of a single city-state. It became the most powerful force in Europe, Middle East, as well as Northern Africa, right? And it arguably probably the most powerful empire at the time, even if you compare it to the Aztecs or the Incas or even the Chinese Empire in the East. It was very powerful, right? But it also went through a decline. So these things happen while you're in it, while you're in the middle of it. We're now in what could be called post-modernity, right? The first world nations. We're living in relative prosperity. And to us, it seems like it's going to be like this forever. There was a really great documentary the other day, Dave, Herculaneum. Herculaneum is on the Bay of Naples. This is a Roman city. It's, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred miles from Pompeii. Everybody knows Pompeii was destroyed when Mount Vesuvius was exploded, right? Herculaneum was also destroyed. But Herculaneum was destroyed in such a way that 25 to 30 feet of ash were deposited on it, which means it makes it the best preserved city of the Roman Empire ever. We have got insights into the Roman Empire we never got before. So it's like a frozen piece of time. These people were in the middle of a prosperous Roman city, going about their business, right? And all of a sudden, Mount Vesuvius erupts and ends everything for them. Now, this is a single city only. I mean, okay, Pompeii and Herculaneum, I get that. But what happened to the Roman Empire afterwards, right? A few hundred years after, all of the Roman Empire collapsed from one day to the next, more or less. I mean, there was a gradual decline, and the writing was on the wall, but it happens. And our civilization is no different. What we call, I don't even know what to call us. I mean, we got a global civilization, more or less, some power players. But what we have here today will collapse. It will be destroyed. I guarantee it. I'm not a doomsday man. I'm not a naysayer, and I'm a realist, okay? Because I've studied history. I know what happens. I know how things work. And you know who's going to be okay? The parasites. You, unless you're a parasite listening to this, so you're okay.
And if you are, we're looking for sponsorship, by the way.
There you unless you are, a parasite, or maybe you're one of those few that are wealthy out of their own strength, which happens as well. Don't get me wrong, right? But there's no moral or ethical justifications to have billionaires exist today in this world, because we need, in order to survive, we need to move to a post-scarcity society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the Great Reset. It's not communism. It's not Chinese social credit. It is none of those things. It is not the Brave New World. It's not 1984, right? We were marching toward those. I can tell you that, though. We are marching hard toward them. We definitely are.
Mm-hmm.
We must course correct. If we can't course correct, okay, in my lifetime, we will see it. I'm 50 now. In my lifetime, we will see the collapse of this civilization, and something else will replace it. It'll happen. Okay? It is a thing that will happen. There's nothing that will stop it unless we all decide to stop it. Okay?
And nobody also brought up talking about religion and about getting rid. Not specifically the person. Nobody wasn't inferring that they're going to do it, but as a society, maybe religion's holding us back. Was paraphrasing him, the person. However, I said my reply, Mackie, was religions will dissolve eventually on their own, because I don't see us taking religion to other planets with us. So religion is a direct function of education, and I like to think of them. When I say education, I mean learned education, not just rote learning, because I'm talking about specifically religion, not faith. I believe that faith is something that we need as human beings. Faith in something. So we have to have a value system. Okay, human beings need a value system. Okay. And if we don't have a value system, then we're pretty much, lost. That's true. For the most part of our history, that has been exploited and been filled with religion, which is a formalized way of worshiping an entity beyond your understanding, God or gods. Some people say, "Oh, I know how to worship God. I know God. Listen to me." And they go, "Oh yeah, thank you very much for telling me about God. Wonderful." And that's how we have lived for a long time. Now that we become, I guess, more educated, more understanding of the universe and science, etc. No, not for everybody and not en masse, but we understand more. And the more we understand, the more we can replace this need to believe in a supernatural, godlike entity with a faith or belief or ethical system that is founded on something else. Now, this is actually a good example. Let me put it this way. Unless a higher authority told you, let me rephrase this. So we decided to build cities. Okay, since we decided to build cities, a lot more people came together to work together, to live together, blah, 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 right? All that stuff. And that's okay. But it also created a whole bunch of social problems. All of a sudden you had all these people together, and there was more conflict, maybe people stole from each other, maybe they had affairs, etc., etc. So a whole bunch of stuff that went south, right? Which maybe hadn't been accounted for by the people that needed the cities. And so what you needed to do was you needed to create social laws. You needed to create a code of conduct that made the cities workable. If you didn't have a code of conduct, the cities would have imploded. They would have eaten themselves. Okay, so somebody thought, hey, we'll have a code of conduct, and the oldest code of conduct that we know it came in the form of the tablets, right? The 10 Commandments. So thou shalt not, and etc.
Yeah. So the 10 Commandments are just a code of conduct for living in cities. That's really all they are. Okay. Now, but because they're code of conduct, how do you enforce it? This is the problem. How do you enforce a code of conduct? You need to have an authority to do that. What better authority than
policing?
To have a God there? There's a God. God is the ultimate authority. In fact, God
the original one
also authorized kings. Kings were kings because God wanted them to be kings. That's what they said, at least. By divine right. I'm king or emperor or czar or whatever, sultan, by divine right. God decreed me to be the king. Let's make no mistake here. Kingship and religion go hand in hand, okay? Or queenship, for that matter. So for the longest time, we look to a higher authority to guide us in our moral and ethical dilemmas. Because, what's the ultimate punishment? You're going to burn in hell, or you're going to be punished some other way by God or gods. because you did the wrong thing, you were sinning, or you transgressed against the laws of the gods or God or whatever. But you needed that higher authority for people to fall in line. Otherwise, why would they? Why would they? Right? They wouldn't. That's the point. But the more realized we become, the more self-actualized we become as human beings, the more we understand how we should be rather than we are. Oh, that's the music. So anyway, please realize and we're going to talk about the reserve rates for the other countries next week. But realize the big con you're in.
Love your work, Mickey. All right, this is David Mickey, Shiny Side Out, episode 481. We'll see you next week. Stay informed. See you then.